born in Chidambaram in Tamil Nadu, and so I studied in Mysore. My school, really, my father would threaten me and say, "Look, if you don't study hard, they said, you're done well enough. If you had been only in the BA degree, he had studied at an Institute for the Blind in New York, and Dr. Frank. And there, of course, I stayed in the Institute for the Blind, and then Dr. Frampton sponsored a good teacher. And so, anyway, he was extremely good, and he made a great impact. But anyway, I resigned, I had no job. Again, I started worrying about a job. But luckily by that time, this is where our institute comes in. By that time, something had happened. The government of India was looking for somebody to head the Institute of Speech and Hearing, Institute of Logopedics that they were trying to start.
Okay.
What had happened was, Indira Gandhi was the information minister at that time. She went to America, and she had a good friend, Gopal Menon, who was in New York, in the New York, India Center. And he had a CP child who was admitted to Palmer's Institute of Logopedics in Kansas.
Okay.
And so he decided to take Indira Gandhi to Palmer's Institute. So he did do that. And when Indira Gandhi went to Palmer Institute, she was so impressed by the institute, she told Dr. Palmer and said, look, why don't you come and advise us? We would like to have an institution like this. He said, yes, so get some American PL 480 funds and I'll come. We'll come. So he did. So Dr. Palmer visited India in 1963 and went around all over India looking for, making plans for an institution. And he had with him a lady called Mrs. Saraswati Menon. And she had been working with Palmer. And so he went around and Mrs. Saraswati Menon was Gopal Menon's sister.
Okay.
And then so Gopal Menon and the Maharaja of Mysore were friends.
Oh.
So Palmer went around and then said, and by that time Oza had come back to India. Ramesh K. Oza was in Bombay. I'm sure you have heard of him there. And he was one of the people who started speech and hearing in India.
Okay.
So Palmer went around and said, I've heard of one Ratna who's somewhere away, lost in the east of some India. And then Oza, of course, he didn't know. So he said, start the institution in Mysore, because Mrs. Menon wanted to stay in Mysore.
Okay.
And he said, I recommend Mrs. Menon as the head of the institution.
Okay.
And which was okay. But by that time, they had agreed to start the institution. So they're looking for somebody to start, to work there, to head the institution actually. And it so happened, I was jobless and they were looking for somebody. So I applied.
Okay.
And this worked out nice. They said, come to Delhi. And I went to Delhi and I was treated extremely well by everybody. And then, of course, I met the secretary. Secretary took one look at me and said, how old are you? I said, 31 years. He said, oh, then do one thing. Forget about the head of the institution or something, but we would like you to work as an officer on special duty for the institute. I said, fine. I want to work for the institution. And so I joined Health Ministry as an officer on special duty. And as an officer on special duty, I started making plans for the institute in Mysore. Dr. Palmer had given a report and he had recommended an institution. But I looked at it, was like an American institution. I said, no, we want something different. Our syllabus would be different, our pattern would be different, because I want to make it Indianized. So I wrote up a whole report about what kind of an institution we want and the whole thing about what they called that EFC memorandum. So estimates finance committee memorandum to the ministry, saying these are the kinds of institutions that we want, these are the posts that we want, these are the salaries we want. Okay, while this was process going on, I also wrote to Mrs. Menon. I said, your name has been suggested. By that time, I had taken a position. And I said, we are recruiting more people. So please send me your biodata. I'm hearing program there. I said, look, please, you by oversight, you have not mentioned any speech and hearing courses you have taken. Please let us know. Then I got a letter from Palmer saying, no, she has not taken any courses, but she has observed our clinic. I said, no, we are looking at somebody else, somebody more training and more specialization. So, of course, Mrs. Menon later went back to Columbia University, got a master's degree in speech and hearing, and came back and became a colleague a little later. Of course, it took some time. But anyway, we were planning all this, and at that time, Dr. Y.P. Kapoor, an ENT specialist who was working in Vellore, he had good contacts in America with the PL, the American officers. I mean, not even, doctorates, etc., high flow. So he knew about this project that we were taking, getting up this plan that Palmer had recommended. And somehow he was associated with Johns Hopkins in America, and those people didn't particularly care for Palmer. So Palmer had agreed to send 4 people if he started a training program in institution, and he had actually started. Some of those people had left their jobs and had started for India. Okay. But at that time, the American government said, no, we will not support that part of it. Wow. So those people had to be rejected. Actually, they had sent their books, etc., to us, and we had to return the books. And we had General B.M. Rao. He was the director of the AFMC in Pune. So when he retired director, he came and joined as senior OSD for speech and hearing in Delhi. And the 2 of us shifted to Mysore. The Maharaja had agreed to give us land, so he gave us land. And I had to do a lot of this, meeting the palace people and getting the land taken. So we took the land. And we didn't like the land that Maharaja had given. So we went to the university and exchanged it for another piece of land, where we are now situated. And we took that and we took a rented building in Mysore because we had to start building. I mean, it took some time for building and all. So we took a rented building in Mysore and started the institute on the 9th of August, 1965. By this time, there was some more information I should give. Dr. Kapoor had held 3 workshops in Vellore, where he had invited senior ENTs. And then, thanks to him, which was really good of him, he invited Oza and me also, because we were planning for the speech and hearing program in India. And Oza was working up on a syllabus for Nair Hospital, and his syllabus was for a diploma in speech and hearing. And because at that time, physiotherapy and occupational therapy diplomas were already there. Okay. And Oza decided to, have a similar program. So a 2-year diploma program. Okay. But I insisted on university degree. Okay. And that way, actually, I kept writing up. And so we planned on 2 programs. One was a regular BSc, MSc program. And another was because we wanted some well-trained people early. So we had what we called a pre-MSc program, under which you would take somebody who had already an undergraduate degree in science, psychology, whatever, and then give them 1 year of pre-MSc training. And after that, for 2 years, they would do an MSc program.
Okay.
So in 3 years, they would get an MSc in speech and hearing. So we started that. And of course, the ENT specialists on the panel with Kapoor wouldn't approve of it at all. And then there's quite a bit of argument about that. But then they had no objection to the diploma program. They were willing. I said, no, we want well-bred, well-trained professionals. And of course, the Johns Hopkins people who were coached by, I suppose, or who had discussions with Kapoor, they also came and said, no, what you want is, you want people to go out into the field and look for people who need ear discharge, who need surgery, and refer them to the ENTs. I said, forget it. I have a problem because I have a lot of people who have speech and hearing problems who are knocking on our doors for help. And I want to train to help people, help them. I'm not interested in going case finding for ENTs. No, that's not our job. And so it took some fight. But then I managed to succeed because the university was behind me. They said, don't worry, we'll support you. And we managed. Of course, the other problem was that the university was worried about which faculty we would be in. The medical faculty didn't want us. Because he said, you are teaching electronics, you're teaching something else, so we are not interested. So we joined the Faculty of Science in the university. And so we started our university pre-MSc program. So that was the initial. Actually, OSA's training program started in June 66. And our MSc program, we started on October 2nd, 66. So in some way, OSA's, the Nair Hospital training program was the first training program, but ours was the first university degree program. And now I realize that at that time, outside America, Mysore University was the first university to have a degree program in speech and hearing anywhere else.
Wow.
In England, they had only diplomats. In Australia, they had only diplomats. Of course, there was no training elsewhere at that time. Of course, later on, England also started their program, degree programs. And, or maybe England had some degree programs before that, I'm not sure. But beyond this, we were the first, and so we always kept telling us as first of its kind in Southeast Asia. So, okay, it was the first of its kind in Southeast Asia. But the toughest part was when we started the institute on 9th August. I was the only person. I mean, Dr. General Rao was an administrator, medical administrator. He's a wonderful person, a gem of a person. And he was wonderful. He gave me a free hand. He said, you are the one who knows the subject, so you do everything. So luckily, it worked out nicely. And the real problem was nobody knew much about speech and hearing. I mean, many times I would say we are looking, at that time, of course, logopedics, nobody knew what logopedics meant. People didn't know. People didn't know what logopedics meant. Actually, I remember people were traveling in the bus. We had a lovely garden, and so we built up a beautiful garden. So they would say, what's logopedics? Somebody would say, maybe something to do with horticulture or something. Anyway, but then soon we changed our name to speech and hearing. And soon we started as a government body, but then soon became an autonomous body. The All India Institute of Speech and Hearing became an autonomous institute with more freedom. And so there we were. We were a training program. We started in 66. And in 67, we started our BSc program. That's when Nagaraja came in as a first batch student. To attract students, we even gave stipends. And many of our earlier students joined us because of the money we were giving. They didn't know what they were going into.
Yeah.
But they said, fine, anyways, they're paying us some money, so why not? But the good thing was, soon we had Dr. Hegde joining us as a lecturer in clinical psychology. You know Dr. Hegde?
Yeah.
He now is a specialist in speech and hearing because he did speech as clinical psychology here, taught with us. Then he went to America and decided to take up speech and hearing.
Okay.
And he has done extremely well in speech and hearing, and I was very fond of him. Very fond of him. I think he's brilliant. But anyway, there he is. So, and then after Hegde, we got Dr. Bharatraj as a psychologist, clinical psychologist. And then we had Dr. Nikam joining us. It was a little late, but then she came as in audiology. And when she had actually a speech and hearing person, but we had to distribute. I said I took up speech and she took up audiology. So that's how it happened. Then she went back to America and specialized in more in audiology. And then so she came back second time. So our training program, luckily, one thing that we did, we decided we were going to be broad-based. We did consider the possibility of specialization. At the pre-MSc, actually, we did have a kind of a specialization. That during the second year, during the second semester, people would select between audiology and speech pathology.
Okay.
But then they had mostly the same courses. But the people who selected audiology would have one extra course in audiology, and people who studied speech pathology would have one extra course in speech pathology.
Okay.
But then apart from that, we said, for the BSc, for example, we said, we'll have one course which would cover both, cover everything. So we spread ourselves very thin, very broad. But then we were very particular that we would not make it thin. But I think it did work out well. We insisted on depth, even though it was broad.
Okay.
So our training programs were quite intense. Students were made to work very hard, and luckily they did manage. They did very well. They did extremely well. And I'm very proud of the way our students have worked. I mean, of course, initially when these people came out, when Nagaraja, Nataraja and others came out, they had no jobs. Even with the pre-MSc, we had finished it, but we had writing to all state governments and every university, etc., asking for jobs to be created. But then they are not easily done. It was not easy. It was a very tough job in the beginning. But then slowly we managed to fill a few jobs. And luckily for us, the few jobs that were filled multiplied. And of course, we lost a lot of people to America and then to England and to Australia. Like we lost you. But then, no, you were one of the later people.
Yeah.
But then we had a good batch of students who worked very hard, and we had a good batch of teachers who worked very hard. And we are very, very pleased with what we've done. Our training program actually was a model for, I remember even the Australians coming in, some team, Australian experts coming in and saying, there are certain things that we can pick up from you. Like the degree program. Australia had only a diploma degree at that time. Then they changed out to a degree program after us. So, and actually the same thing happened here. The Nair Hospital also, after a couple of years, they found that our degree graduates were getting better jobs than their diplomates. So they converted the diplomas into degrees. Some of them took another exam, etc., and then got the degrees. And at the same time, having seen us, the physiotherapists and occupational therapists also started degree programs. So now we have good paramedicals, strong paramedical programs going on. So to that extent, I think we proved a point and we managed well. So we've done extremely well. We're very happy, very proud of what's happened. Luckily, of course, I must say this, we started, I mean, my project was, one of the first project was starting the institute. That itself was a PL 480 funded project. And it worked out apparently well because the institution has stood on good grounds. And then, of course, we were blessed by a number of things. One, the American Speech and Hearing Association donated all back volumes of JSHD and JSHR to us.
Wow.
And so our library became quite strong. Otherwise, initially, our library was a problem because books were costly. And actually, when I started the institution in Mysore, I had borrowed 4 books from the DGHS library in Ministry of Health. Yeah. And that was all we had. And plus, of course, my own personal books that we had. Which I had collected when I was a student. But then slowly we built up a library. And now I think the Aish library is an extremely good library. It's a very, and of course, now that we have computers and all, that's become almost irrelevant. But anyway, there it is. We did have a lot. But then we also got all the books of Wendell Johnson.
Wow.
They were donated to us, and we have a little shelf, a few 4 shelves called Wendell Johnson Library in the Mysore Institute. And and then England came, from England, from UK, we got under the foundation, we got some books, we got grants for books, and so we were fairly well supported by a number of people. And then, of course, Denmark started giving us free hearing aids to be distributed free to poor people. Of course, that's another story. We'll not go into that. But we did start working that way. But at that time, the only hearing aids that were available, body level hearing aids. But then we kept managing. But the other thing that happened was, this is an important thing. In the institute, once we started our training institution, clients started coming with speech and hearing problems. So initially, in the earlier years, we also had what we called speech and hearing camps. I would get into a bus with one class of students and go out to a small town or small village and announce the Rotary Club or Lions Club would support us. They would announce that we are coming. So we would stay in that place for about 2 or 3 days and see all the children who were brought to us. We did achieve one thing very important. We created an awareness. And also, for example, another thing I was very happy about is like severely, retarded children, when we got them, we at least made people aware that there was no medical cure for them. But unfortunately, what happened, we couldn't follow up. We had to rely upon parents. So that's where I started learning that we must depend on parents. Our whole training program was based on the fact, on the theory that speech and hearing therapists should become useless as soon as possible and pass on the job to the parents. The other thing was, little children came. We had no place to send him to. And the schools that was there, as I said, had minimum age 12 years. Wait for our child to get an education for 12 years. So we said, no. Start working with your child at home, and then send the child to the nearest school. So here we were talking of inclusion, we were talking of parent participation, parent responsibility, almost to an extent community-based rehabilitation. Even before these were formally announced by the government of India. So we had started that in Mysore. But our clinical work was very good. It worked out well. Though, of course, initially, I was alone, but we started using our students in clinic. So we gave them a lot of experience. Partly because we needed the services, and partly because this was a good training for them. So I'm very, very proud of what's happened. And then at a time, I mean, there was a time when people didn't know what we were, what speech and hearing was.
Yeah.
And there was a time people weren't sure whether they should take this training program or not. Now, if you know, people are paying capitation fees to join speech and hearing programs.
Right.
And so many institutions have come up, and they're all thriving on the capitation fees that they collect.
That's
So
right.
it's good.
Yeah.
It's good. We have come a long way.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that institute, as you can see behind,
Correct.
it's come up beautifully. It's really a great, I mean, it's a great thrill. I mean, I look at it and say, this was a seed I planted, and it's now grown to a huge tree. Two things. One thing I think, because most of these institutions which have come are headed by people who trained with us,
Yes.
either with us here in Mysore or in Bombay. Ovaza and Shaw came also as an audiologist in Bombay. And of course, our own Jagdish went there and worked. I mean, these are people. But then a lot of the people, our alumni have accepted the responsibilities of very high positions elsewhere. They have started institutions, they held senior positions, both here and abroad. In America, especially, for example, quite a few of our people have made a good name there.
Yeah.
And then, but what we work very hard. Our people are working very hard even today. We have been developing a lot of tests. We've been developing our own techniques. And for example, Pratibha Karans has a ComDeal program for autism, which is very well recognized. And quite a lot of things are happening. But then, and I now feel quite proud that I think our students, our institutions are abreast of what's happening abroad.
Yeah.
I'm happy about that. But then, I mean, abreast of part of it is good and part of it is bad, because good is theoretically, we are all quite sound now, quite sound.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, clinically, we fall behind a little.
Okay.
Because for one thing, because of our population growth and because of, I mean, all kinds of other situations, our documentation is not all that good.
Correct.
So I think our documentation should improve. The other thing I would like is, of course, so far I don't think we have gone into any groundbreaking research.
Okay.
We have followed the West and we have followed the rest of the world. But then I suppose it's high time that we started breaking new ground ourselves.
That's right.
That's what I look forward to now. But otherwise, I think the services are now, but then I'm still not too happy with the availability of services to the people all around.
Okay.
We've trained our students so well. As I keep saying, unfortunately, almost like export quality. Schools for the handicapped, disabled, our centers in the villages, and most of our people, population live in the villages. So our institutions in the villages, they don't get people.
Okay.
Because our schools can't afford speech and hearing graduates anymore. We are very costly. And we demand a lot of money and we get it. So why would we go and work in a small school with less salary? So this has become a problem. We have tried to overcome that, but then apparently that has not worked. We even had what are called a diploma for communication disorders. But unfortunately, those diplomates went ahead and put up shingles as speech and hearing therapists in big towns. They stayed in the big towns. And then they started competing with our fully trained people.
Correct.
And this has caused a lot of heartburn, unfortunately. I mean, but then the idea was that they would go back to the villages, go back to the small towns, work in schools, work under supervision. That's not happened.
Okay.
So, Right now, again, there's a big quarrel going on because the government is trying to develop these barefoot assistant, what they call the speech and hearing assistants,
Uh-huh.
and the professionals are not too happy about it because they know what will happen to those assistants.
Exactly.
So this is a problem. But then the problem really is we have to find a way by which, but now I suppose it's possible. Real professional, high quality professional service should be available to everybody everywhere.
Yes.
Now with the media and all that, with Zoom, not Zoom, it's like Zoom because now we don't want Zoom, it's Chinese. But anyway, but with the media, spread of media and with the spread of smartphones, we're hoping, I'm hoping, that we'll be able to provide online services, online high-class quality professional services to all people outside. I mean, out of our reach.
Okay.
And I think this should get, it's begun to happen. Teleservicing has started to happen, teleteaching has started to happen. And I hope that this will become more and more meaningful and useful so that we could reach more and more people. So two things. One, professionally, I'd like some groundbreaking research to be brought up from our own, because we're capable of it. And we should be able to do that.
Okay.
Two, we should find ways and means of spreading our reach,
Okay.
our professional reach further and further. And I think this will be, I see it coming. I
Okay.
see it coming. It started, I think it's coming. Well, now I sleep most of the time. I mean, my students also tell me that even in class while I'm teaching, I would nod off to sleep every once in a while and then come back to my lessons, lectures. But anyway, but now actually I read a lot. I mean, I don't work in speech and hearing anymore. I mean, except if people want to consult me, they're most welcome. I mean, I don't charge any money or anything. I'm quite happy with the way government has treated me, so that's okay. And as I said, I'm not a very ambitious person anyway, so that's another. But then I keep playing chess on my mobile to myself, and I read quite a bit. I've been trying to write some plays. I have written some, but then I'd like to continue writing more.
Wow.
Unfortunately, with COVID, my theatre activities have come down. With COVID plus my health, because of my health, I've been told that I can't stay on in Mysore by myself or with my wife. So we have come now to stay with my children to Bangalore. Here I don't get into theatre. So I miss my theatre. So the only way I can keep in touch with my theatre is through writing and reading. I direct plays, I act, and I have written some plays. The plays that brought me a name were Yellige, Bonte, and Godeveke Gode. Godeveke Gode is Wall for Sale, and Yellige is Where To, and Bonte is Stuffed. Of course, I've had other plays also I've written. I've written a lot of radio plays. I've been busy doing that, but not busy enough. I mean, I could do much more, but as I said, my laziness doesn't permit me to do all that. Very proud of my family. I have a lovely wife who cooks very well, not these days, of course, she's not being permitted to cook, actually. My children look after all that. I have 2 children. My daughter works with Concern for Working Children, which deals with working children and street children. And she is also into a lot of panchayat, that's local government activities. And fighting against child marriage and a whole lot of other things. Trying to interact with the government to make programs for the children and for the villages and for the panchayats. And my son is a helicopter pilot. He was in the Indian Navy.
Wow.
And now he took leave from, relieved himself from the Indian Navy and is now working for a oil company, not oil company, for an aviation company which supplies, works for oil drills.
Okay.
So he is now on that. And my son-in-law is a design specialist, but then now become an administrator in SAP, which is a big organization.
Mm-hmm.
And he looks after Asia and India, China.
Wow.
And my daughter-in-law is an artist. She keeps painting a lot.
Wow.
And my daughter has a daughter who has now done a psychology administration. And she's now working in psychology.
All right.
And grandson is now finishing his BCom in honors in economics, and he's interested in sports management. Very happy about that.
Nice.
Luckily, we have, partly because of our health reasons, we have stayed at home all the time, and so saved ourselves from COVID problems.
Correct.
We're okay. We're doing that. I have always been emphasizing clinical services. It's all very fine to have very strong theoretical background, but we are primarily a clinical activity. We should not forget that. Our responsibility to our clientele should be very high. And so whatever else we do, we should keep our allegiance to our clientele and clinical activity. And I always say, you should respect your clients, love your clients, and give them the best that you can without looking at the rewards that you will get out of it. The rewards come from the results you get from your work, not from the money or whatever other things that you get, positions. But the real, as I was talking to Oza recently, and Oza said, he is a great person, one of our finest people. Luckily, of course, the two of us were together at the beginning, and we continue to be very good friends. And recently I saw a photograph of Oza with a child in the clinic, and both of them with big smiles on their faces. I wrote to Oza saying, I envy you because you have been working still. And I said, keep smiling. He wrote back and said, I think work is worship, and the smile of the child is the greatest reward I get. And I think I admire him for that. And I would want all our students and prospective speech and hearing clinicians should be clinicians and should look at work as worship. I think that's a great idea. Thank you. Good luck. Good luck.